I want you to imagine something with me. You're deep in the woods, completely alone, and you wake up to find a cup of tea on your camping table. It's still warm. You can see the steam rising off it. But here's the thing, you didn't make it. You're miles from another living soul. Or at least, that's what you thought. Now picture this. You're lying in your tent in absolute darkness when you hear footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps circling you. Then the whispering starts. Words you can't quite make out, getting closer and closer until they're right outside your tent wall. And finally, imagine helping a disoriented woman find her campsite in the middle of the night, only to see her again days later. Except this time, her eyes are completely black and her skin has turned gray, and she's walking toward you while reality itself seems to bend around her. These aren't campfire stories I made up to scare you. These are real experiences from real people who went into the woods expecting peace and solitude, and found something else entirely. Something they still can't explain. And after you hear what happened to them, you might never look at camping the same way again. Stay with me, because what comes next will change how you think about being alone in nature. There's this thing that happens when you're alone in nature for long enough. The constant noise in your head just sort of quiets down. Your breathing syncs up with the rhythm of the forest. You start noticing things you'd never see otherwise. The way light filters through leaves, how the temperature drops when clouds pass overhead, the particular sound of wind moving through pine trees versus oak. That's why I camp alone. Not because I don't like people, but because solitude has this way of resetting something deep inside me. So when I planned this 3-day trip to a forest I'd never visited before, I was chasing that feeling. That sense of being completely disconnected from everything artificial, everything hurried, everything loud. The forest I chose was remote enough that even the drive there felt like traveling backward in time. For hours of increasingly rough roads, watching houses give way to trees, pavement give way to dirt, until I was bumping along a path that barely qualified as a road at all. When I finally found a clearing that felt right, I actually stopped and just stood there for a moment, taking it in. The silence was profound. Not the empty silence of a room, but the alive silence of a place where nature fills every space. I could hear my own heartbeat. That's when I knew I'd made the right choice. Setting up camp that first evening had this meditative quality to it. Each task had a rhythm, staking the tent, arranging my sleeping bag, organizing supplies so I'd know where everything was even in the dark. By the time I got a small fire going, the sun was already starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too vivid to be real. I cooked a simple meal of beans, ate slowly while watching the stars emerge one by one, and felt something in my chest unclench. This was exactly what I'd needed. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag that night, I remember thinking that tomorrow's hike would be perfect. I fell asleep with that thought, comfortable and at peace. The next day delivered on that promise. I spent hours moving through the forest, not following any particular trail, just wandering and observing. I spotted a small herd of deer that froze when they noticed me, their ears twitching as they decided I wasn't a threat. Later, a fox darted across my path so quickly I almost missed it. But the best part, the thing that made me smile, was the complete absence of other people. No distant voices, no glimpses of bright camping gear through the trees. Just me in the wilderness, exactly as I'd hoped. When evening came and I returned to camp, my legs pleasantly sore from the day's exploration, I felt that same contentment settle over me. I made some noodles, read by the firelight until my eyes grew heavy, then carefully put out the fire and retreated to my tent. I was asleep within minutes, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep you only get when you're genuinely exhausted. But something woke me. I opened my eyes to complete darkness and lay there, trying to understand what had pulled me from sleep. Had it been a sound? A dream? I couldn't remember. But something felt wrong. The forest outside my tent had gone completely silent. You know that quality of silence that feels almost aggressive? That's what surrounded me. No wind rustling through branches. No small animals moving through the underbrush. No insects chirping their night songs. Nothing. It was like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world, and the absence of sound had a weight to it that made my skin prickle. I reached for my watch and pressed the button to light up the display. 3 a.m. The witching hour, my grandmother used to call it. I almost laughed at the thought, but the sound died in my throat. The silence was too oppressive for laughter. I tried to rationalize it. Forests go quiet sometimes. Maybe a predator was nearby, something big enough to make the smaller animals go still. Or maybe it was just one of those random moments of stillness that happen in nature. There were a dozen reasonable explanations, and I cycled through all of them as I lay there, trying to convince myself to relax. Eventually, exhaustion won out over unease, and I drifted back into an uneasy sleep. Morning came with bird song and golden light, and I actually felt embarrassed about my nighttime anxiety. I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the crisp morning air, already planning my coffee and breakfast routine. That's when I saw it. On my camping table, the small folding one I'd set up near the fire pit, there was a cup. A ceramic mug, the kind you'd use in your kitchen at home. And it was full of tea. I walked toward it slowly, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. As I got closer, I could see steam rising from the surface in delicate wisps. I reached out and touched the side of the cup. Warm. Not hot enough to burn, but definitely warm enough that it had been made recently. Very recently. I picked it up with shaking hands and looked inside. Someone had taken several sips from it. I could see where their lips had touched the rim, leaving a faint mark. The rational part of my brain started scrambling for explanations. Maybe I'd made this in my sleep. Maybe I'd woken up earlier than I remembered, made tea, and somehow blocked out the memory. People do strange things when they're not fully awake, right? But I knew. Deep down, in that place where your instincts live, I knew those explanations were wrong. I hadn't made this tea. I hadn't even unpacked my stove yet that morning. The last time I'd boiled water was the previous evening, and I distinctly remembered cleaning and putting everything away before bed. I set the cup down and started looking around my campsite, really looking, searching for any sign of who'd been there. My food containers sat exactly where I'd left them, sealed and untouched. My backpack was still propped against the tree where I'd placed it. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. But there were no footprints in the soft earth around my tent either. No cigarette butts, no forgotten items, no evidence that another person had been anywhere near my camp. The implications started sinking in, each one worse than the last. Someone had been here while I slept. Close enough to use my table. Close enough to boil water and make tea. Close enough to take a few sips while standing just feet from where I lay unconscious and vulnerable in my tent. And they'd done all of this without making a sound, without leaving a trace, without me having any idea they were there. The forest suddenly didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like it was watching me, like the trees themselves had eyes hidden in their bark, tracking my every movement. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, fast and hard. I need you to do something for me before I continue. If this story is already making your skin crawl, hit that like button right now. And drop a comment telling me what you would do in this situation. Because I'm about to tell you the decision I made, and I still don't know if it was the right one. I tried to think logically. I really did. But logic kept running into the wall of that warm teacup. That physical, undeniable evidence that someone had been there. Someone who either didn't want to wake me or, worse, wanted me to sleep through their visit. The decision made itself. I had to leave. Right now. Not after breakfast, not after packing carefully. Now. My hands trembled as I tore down the tent, not bothering to fold it properly, just yanking out stakes and stuffing fabric into bags. I threw my sleeping bag on top without rolling it, grabbed my food containers and shoved them into my backpack. The whole time, I kept glancing around, expecting to see someone watching from between the trees. The hike back to my car took half the time it should have, because I was practically running. Every sound made me flinch. A branch cracking somewhere off to my left sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. When a bird suddenly took flight from a nearby tree, I actually yelped, the sound embarrassingly loud in the quiet forest. I reached my car and threw my gear into the back seat, not caring how it landed. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I managed to get them into the ignition. The engine turning over felt like the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, proof that I was about to leave this place behind. As I put the car in reverse and started backing down the narrow path, I made the mistake of looking in my rearview mirror. The forest seemed to shift behind me, the trees appearing to move closer together, filling in the space where I'd been. Like it was erasing all evidence of my presence. Like it was swallowing up my campsite and that impossible cup of tea, hiding its secrets from the world. I didn't stop driving until I pulled into my own driveway. I sat in my car for a long moment, just breathing, trying to convince myself that I was safe now. Then I went inside, locked every door and window, and sat down at my kitchen table with my own cup of tea, trying desperately to make sense of what had happened. But sense wouldn't come. No matter how I approached it, no matter what explanations I constructed. They all fell apart when confronted with the simple fact of that warm teacup. Someone had been there. Someone who moved through the forest silently enough that they left no trace. Someone who got close enough to use my camping equipment while I slept nearby, completely unaware. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I'd be at work and suddenly spin around, certain someone was behind me. I'd be home alone and hear a sound, and my whole body would go rigid with fear. I started questioning everything. Had it really happened? Was my memory reliable? Could I trust my own senses? But then I'd remember the warmth of that cup against my palm, and I knew it had been real. A week later, I did something that might seem crazy. I went back. The not knowing was worse than the fear, I decided. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had happened in that forest. So I loaded my car again and made that long drive, my heart pounding steadily louder the closer I got. When I reached the campsite, it looked exactly as I remembered. The clearing was still there, the trees still surrounding it like silent sentinels. I found the spot where my tent had stood and walked over to where the table had been. But there was nothing. No cup, no tea stains, no evidence that anything unusual had occurred there. I spent the night in my car this time, doors locked, one hand wrapped around a flashlight, the other on my phone. I watched the darkness beyond my windows for hours, every shadow a potential threat, every sound making me jump. But nothing happened. The night passed without incident, quiet and uneventful. In the morning, I got out and searched the area thoroughly, looking for any clue I might have missed. I examined the ground where the cup had been, walked in expanding circles around my old campsite, even ventured into the surrounding woods looking for any sign of occupation. But the forest kept its secrets. I drove home that day without answers, but with one absolute certainty that had settled into my bones. I would never camp alone in that forest again. Maybe not in any forest. Because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some places hold secrets that we're not equipped to understand. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you discover, but what remains hidden just beyond your perception, watching from the shadows, leaving warm cups of tea as silent messages that you were never as alone as you thought. When my girlfriend suggested we celebrate our anniversary with a camping trip, I thought it was a brilliant idea. We'd been together for 3 years, and while we'd done the fancy restaurant thing and the weekend getaway thing, we'd never just gone out into nature together. It seemed romantic in a different way, just the two of us under the stars, away from phones and obligations and the constant noise of city life. We picked a state park about 5 hours from home, far enough to feel like a real escape. We left early on a Saturday morning, the day after a major storm system had passed through the area. As we drove, we could see the aftermath, branches scattered across roads, standing water in ditches, trees bent at impossible angles. Part of me wondered if we should turn back, but the weather forecast promised clear skies all weekend, and we were both excited enough to push forward. When we arrived at the park entrance around 1 in the afternoon, the ranger at the gate gave us our permit and mentioned something that made us exchange grins. We were the only campers staying that weekend. Most people had canceled their reservations because of the storm damage. "You'll have the whole place to yourselves," he said, smiling. "Enjoy the peace and quiet." We thanked him and followed his directions down a winding path that grew progressively narrower. The further we drove, the more isolated it felt. Trees pressed in on both sides, branches sometimes scraping against the car. Finally, we noticed that the path had become essentially one way. There was no room to turn around. We'd have to back out entirely when we left. "We're really out here," my girlfriend said, and I couldn't tell if she sounded excited or nervous. We reached our designated camping area and spent the next hour setting up our tent. Neither of us was particularly experienced, and we'd probably watched 3 different YouTube videos trying to prepare, but we managed to get everything secured without any major disasters. Once camp was established, she suggested we explore before it got dark. The forest was eerily quiet as we walked. The storm must have driven away the wildlife because we didn't hear a single bird or see any animals during our entire hike. Our footsteps on the wet leaves seemed unnaturally loud, like we were intruders in a place that didn't want us there. After walking for maybe 2 miles, we came across something that made us both stop short. A cluster of white cabins, maybe half a dozen of them, all identical. They looked abandoned, or at least unoccupied, with no lights, no cars, no signs of recent use. But what struck me most was how uniform they were. Exactly the same size, same design, same white paint, arranged in a perfect semicircle. They reminded me of something, but I couldn't quite place what. "This is creepy," my girlfriend said, gripping my hand tighter. "Can we go back?" I agreed immediately. Something about those cabins felt deeply wrong, like we'd stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to see. We turned around and walked briskly back toward our campsite, neither of us voicing the unease we both felt. Back at camp, we tried to recapture the romantic mood we'd started with. We attempted to build a fire, which turned into a comedy of errors. We'd bought self-lighting logs, thinking they'd make everything easy, but we hadn't accounted for how soaked everything would be from the previous day's rain. We needed kindling, but finding anything dry was nearly impossible. After about an hour of struggle, we finally got a small fire going. We cooked hot dogs that were slightly burnt on the outside and still cold in the middle, and roasted marshmallows that either caught on fire or refused to melt. We laughed about our complete lack of camping skills, and for a while, everything felt right again. After we ate, we lay on our backs watching the stars emerge. The sky was incredible out there, so far from any city lights. The Milky Way stretched overhead like someone had spilled milk across a black canvas, and we could see shooting stars every few minutes. "This was a good idea," she said, nestling closer to me. "I'm glad we came." But as the fire died down, the darkness around us became absolute. And I mean absolute. When I held my hand up a few inches from my face, I couldn't see it at all. The kind of darkness that makes you understand why ancient humans were terrified of the night. "It's really dark out here," she said quietly, and I could hear the tension in her voice. "Yeah, want to head into the tent?" She nodded, and we carefully put out what remained of our fire before crawling into our tent and zipping it closed. We lay there for a while, talking in quiet voices about nothing important, just filling the silence. But I could tell she was on edge, listening to every sound from outside. Then her hand shot out and clamped over my mouth. I froze, about to ask what was wrong, but she whispered a single word that made my blood run cold. "Listen." I held my breath and listened. Footsteps. Definitely footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, crunching through the wet leaves around our campsite. But not just one person. It sounded like several people walking slowly, circling our tent. "It's probably just deer or something," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. But then we heard the voices. Low, hushed mumbling. Human voices, definitely human, speaking in tones too quiet to make out actual words. But there were multiple voices, several people whispering among themselves as they moved around our tent. We sat completely frozen, staring at each other in the darkness. Her fingernails dug into my arm hard enough to hurt, but I barely noticed. All my attention was focused on those sounds outside. The footsteps, the whispers, getting closer and closer with each passing second. The sounds circled our tent once, twice, 3 times. Then they stopped, right outside, so close that if I reached through the tent fabric, I could have touched whoever was there. The whispering stopped too. Complete silence. More terrifying than the sounds had been, because now we didn't know where they were or what they were doing. We sat there in the dark, not daring to move or breathe, for what felt like an hour but was probably only minutes. Finally, she breathed into my ear. "We need to get to your car. Now." If you're sitting there thinking there's no way you'd leave that tent, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now, because what happens next is absolutely insane. And turn on notifications so you never miss another true horror story. Adrenaline does strange things to you. It makes terrible ideas seem perfectly reasonable. It makes your hands steady even when you're terrified. That's the only explanation for what I did next. I slowly, carefully unzipped the tent, just enough to peek outside. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness enough that I could make out shapes. Trees, our camping equipment, the vague outline of my car parked maybe 30 feet away. But I didn't see anyone. No figures standing in the darkness. No movement. "Stay right behind me," I whispered. "Don't stop for anything." We burst out of the tent and ran. Not a careful jog, but a full-on sprint, the kind of run you do when you're certain something is chasing you. I fumbled with my car keys, nearly dropped them, finally got the doors unlocked. We threw ourselves inside, and I immediately hit the lock button. I looked around frantically, searching for any sign of the people we'd heard. But there was nothing. The campsite looked empty. Peaceful even. Like we'd imagined the whole thing. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound calm. "I'm gonna grab our stuff. You stay here with the doors locked." Before she could argue, I jumped back out. I grabbed our ice chest first, throwing it into the back seat. Then I turned toward the tent, and that's when I heard them again. Footsteps. Rapid footsteps, moving toward me through the darkness. Panic took over completely. I didn't carefully collapse the tent. I grabbed it and yanked it straight out of the ground, stakes flying everywhere. I didn't care about damage or organization. I just wrapped the whole thing in its tarp, hoisted it over my shoulder like some kind of deranged burglar, and ran back to the car. I threw the tent into the trunk, dove into the driver's seat, and slammed the car into reverse. "Do we have everything?" I asked, already backing up as fast as I dared. "Yes. Just go." I floored it, reversing down that narrow path in the darkness, branches scraping against both sides of the car. But when we reached the main junction where multiple paths branched off, my heart sank. There were 6 different directions, maybe more, and in my panic, I had no idea which one led back to the entrance. "Which way did we come in?" I asked desperately. "I don't know. I wasn't paying attention." I chose a direction at random and reversed down it, only to find ourselves in a different camping area. I cursed and started backing up again, my eyes scanning frantically for any landmark I recognized. That's when I saw it, and my skin crawled. From this angle, looking back toward where our campsite had been, there was a single green light in the woods, just hovering there in the darkness, unmoving. Not a flashlight beam, not a lantern, just a small, steady green glow exactly where we'd been camping. I didn't wait to figure out what it was. I spotted a faded sign partially hidden behind overgrown bushes, pointing toward the main gate. I followed it, driving faster than was safe down that bumpy, narrow path, not caring about the scraping sounds or the way the car bounced over roots and rocks. We didn't speak during the entire 5-hour drive home. What could we say? We'd both heard the footsteps. We'd both heard the whispers. We'd both felt that overwhelming sense of danger, that primal certainty that we needed to run or something terrible would happen. We arrived at her parents' house around 4 in the morning and collapsed on their couch, too exhausted and shaken to even explain where we'd been or why we'd come back early. To this day, neither of us knows what was out there with us that night, who those people were, if they were people at all, what they wanted, why they were circling our tent in the darkness, whispering to each other in voices too low to understand. Sometimes I think about those white cabins we saw during our hike, the way they were arranged in that perfect semicircle, the way they looked abandoned but somehow maintained. And I wonder if there's a connection, if we'd stumbled onto something we weren't meant to see, and someone wanted to make sure we didn't stay long enough to figure out what it was. All I know for certain is this: we never went back to that campground. We never even drove past the entrance. And when people ask us about camping now, we both politely decline. Because some experiences change you. Some fears, once triggered, never really go away. And some questions are more terrifying than any answer could ever be. I was 14 when this happened, and sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, my heart racing, trying to convince myself it was just a dream, even though I know it wasn't. My family had planned a camping trip to a state park, and I'd been allowed to bring my best friend. We were both thrilled about the adventure, already planning how we'd explore the woods during the day and tell scary stories around the campfire at night. We had no idea we'd soon have a story of our own, one that neither of us has ever been able to explain or forget. After we arrived and our families set up the tents, my friend and I established what we called the walk. Every night after dinner, we'd grab our flashlights and explore the forest in the dark. There was something thrilling about it, navigating through trees when you could only see a few feet ahead, when every shadow could hide something unexpected. It made us feel brave and grown-up, like real adventurers. On our second night there, we decided to push deeper into the woods than we'd ever gone before. The main trails felt boring, too safe. We wanted to find something new, maybe discover a hidden clearing or an interesting rock formation. So we left the marked paths behind and headed into the denser part of the forest. As we walked, the trees seemed to grow taller and press closer together. The shadows between them became deeper, more solid. We started hearing sounds, twigs snapping behind us, leaves rustling when there was no breeze. We told ourselves it was just animals, maybe raccoons or possums, nothing to worry about. But then the whispering started. At first, it was so soft I thought I was imagining it. But my friend stopped walking and looked at me with wide eyes, so I knew he heard it too. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding us. We spun in circles, shining our flashlights in every direction, but we couldn't see anyone. "Maybe it's the wind," my friend suggested, but his voice was shaky. "Yeah," I agreed, even though I knew that wasn't what we were hearing. We tried to keep walking, tried to act like everything was fine, but the whispering grew louder. Not clearer, though. We still couldn't make out actual words. It was like listening to a conversation through thick walls, hearing the rhythm and tone but not the meaning. We stopped again, and that's when we saw her. About 20 feet ahead, a woman was crawling on the ground. She wore dark clothes that blended into the shadows, moving slowly on her hands and knees like she was searching for something. And she was the source of the whispering, muttering words we couldn't understand. We froze, our flashlights fixed on her. She must have noticed the light, because she slowly looked up at us. Her eyes caught the beam of my flashlight and seemed to reflect it back like an animal's. Then she stood up, swaying slightly, and I could see her face properly for the first time. She looked young, maybe in her 20s, but something about her expression was off. Blank. Like she was looking at us but not really seeing us. "I'm looking for my campsite," she said. Her words were slurred, running together. "Can't find my campsite." My friend and I exchanged a nervous glance. She seemed disoriented, possibly drunk, definitely in no condition to be wandering alone in the dark woods. Every instinct told me we should run, but I'd been raised to help people who needed it. And she clearly needed help. "We can help you find it," I offered, my voice sounding braver than I felt. She nodded and started walking, stumbling over roots and rocks. We followed beside her, lighting the path and trying to guide her back toward the main campground. She kept whispering to herself as we walked, sometimes saying actual words like lost and dark and can't find, but mostly just making sounds that seemed like words but weren't. It took maybe 20 minutes to find her campsite, and when we did, something about it felt wrong immediately. There was a tent set up and a fire pit with cold ashes, but no people. No sounds of conversation or laughter. No lanterns or flashlights moving around. Just emptiness. "Where are your friends?" my friend asked. She waved her hand vaguely. "Around. Somewhere around." We helped her to her tent, watched her crawl inside, and then stood there uncertainly. Should we wait to make sure she was okay? Should we try to find her friends and tell them she'd been wandering alone? We ultimately decided to head back to our own campsite. We'd done what we could, and honestly, something about the situation made both of us want to get away. The next day, we saw her again. She was sitting by a campfire at her site, but she looked different in the daylight. Her skin seemed paler than it had the night before, almost gray. Her eyes were sunken, ringed with dark circles. When we walked past, she barely acknowledged us, just stared straight ahead at something we couldn't see, like she was watching something play out that only she could perceive. "She looks sick," my friend whispered. "Yeah, maybe we should tell someone." But we didn't. We were kids, and there was an adult, and who were we to say something was wrong? Besides, maybe she'd just been really drunk the night before, and now she had a bad hangover. That would explain everything, right? Except it didn't feel like that was all it was. For the rest of the trip, we kept seeing her. She'd be at the edge of the campground when we walked past, standing near the bathrooms when we went to brush our teeth, sitting by her fire when we returned from our hikes. Always alone. Always with that same distant stare. And every time we saw her, she looked a little less substantial, like she was fading somehow, becoming more shadow than person. On our last night, we decided to take one final walk through the woods. It was probably stupid, considering what had happened, but we wanted to end the trip on a brave note. We wanted to prove to ourselves that we weren't scared, that we could handle the darkness and the strange sounds. I need you to comment below and tell me what you would have done in this situation. Would you have gone into those woods on the last night? Or would you have stayed safely at camp? Because looking back now, I wish we'd made a different choice. We grabbed our flashlights and headed down the same path we'd taken that second night, the path where we'd first seen her. The forest felt different immediately, heavier somehow, like the air itself had weight, and the whispering started almost as soon as we left the campground. But this time it was louder, more insistent. It echoed through the trees, seeming to come from every direction at once. We spun around, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, searching for the source. And then she appeared. Not gradually, not walking into view. She was just suddenly there, standing directly in front of us, maybe 10 feet away. But she didn't look like she had before. Her eyes were completely black, like someone had filled them with ink. Her skin had taken on that gray tone I'd noticed earlier, but more pronounced now, like stone or ash. And she was whispering, that same incomprehensible sound we'd heard our first night, but now it filled the entire forest, overwhelming everything else. We tried to run. I remember my brain screaming at my legs to move, but they wouldn't respond. It was like being in a nightmare where you try to scream, but no sound comes out. We were frozen, paralyzed, unable to do anything but watch as she started walking toward us. She moved slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact. Her mouth kept moving in that endless whisper, and the closer she got, the more I could feel it. Not hear it. Feel it. Like the whispers were vibrating inside my skull, pressing against the inside of my head. My friend grabbed my arm, and I could feel him trembling. Or maybe that was me trembling. Or both of us. Everything felt surreal, like reality was bending around her presence. The trees seemed to lean in, watching. The darkness seemed alive. She got closer. 5 feet away. 3 feet. Close enough that I could have reached out and touched her if I could move. Her black eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something in them. Not evil exactly, but emptiness. A void where something human should have been. Then everything went black. Not like closing your eyes black. Like the world simply stopped existing black. A complete absence of everything. Sight, sound, sensation. Just nothing. The next thing I remember is waking up at our campsite with my friend shaking me frantically, calling my name over and over. What happened? I asked. My voice sounded strange, distant, like I was hearing it through water. You collapsed, he said, and his eyes were filled with tears. We were in the woods and you just fell. I couldn't wake you up. I had to drag you back here. But the woman. What woman? There was no one there. It was just you and me. I sat up, my head spinning. No, she was right there. She was walking toward us. You saw her. He shook his head. I saw you stop walking and stare at something I couldn't see. Then you fell. That's all. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that we'd both seen her, but the look on his face stopped me. He was terrified, and not of some mysterious woman. He was terrified of me, of what he'd witnessed. We need to leave, I said. Right now. We have to go. He didn't question it. Maybe he felt it too, that sense that we needed to get away from this place immediately. We woke our parents, told them we were feeling sick, insisted we had to go home right then. They could see how shaken we were and agreed without too much argument. As we packed up camp in the pre-dawn darkness, I kept looking around, searching for her. And just as we were loading the last of our gear into the car, I saw her one final time. She was standing at the tree line, partially hidden by shadows. Her lips were still moving in that endless whisper. But she didn't try to approach. She just watched us leave. My friend and I never spoke about that night again. Not the next day, not the next week, not ever. It was like an unspoken agreement that some things are better left unexamined, some experiences better left buried. But the memory stayed with me, vivid and haunting. For years afterward, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I could hear whispering. I'd lie in my bed, frozen, listening for those sounds in the darkness. Sometimes I'd see shadows at the edge of my vision that looked almost human, but not quite. And I'd remember her face, those black eyes, that sense of emptiness that seemed to radiate from her. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Tried to convince myself that she was just a disturbed person, and my fear and imagination transformed her into something supernatural. That the stress of being young and scared in an unfamiliar place made me see things that weren't there. That my friend was right, and she was never there at all. That I experienced some kind of episode brought on by exhaustion or dehydration or teenage hormones. But I can't make myself believe those explanations. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. There are places in this world where the normal rules don't quite apply, where things exist that we're not meant to understand or interact with. And that campground, or at least that section of the forest, was one of them. I'm in my 30s now, and I've never been camping since. Not even car camping with friends. Not even in well-populated campgrounds with rangers and other families nearby. Because sometimes one experience is enough. Sometimes you learn a lesson so thoroughly that you never need it repeated. The woman in the woods taught me that some boundaries exist for a reason. That curiosity isn't always rewarded. That darkness, real darkness, doesn't just hide things. Sometimes it is things, taking forms we recognize just enough to approach, just enough to let our guard down. And sometimes the most terrifying truth is that we're not alone in the world. That there are other things out there, watching from the shadows, whispering in voices we can barely hear, waiting for the right moment to step forward and reveal themselves as something that was never quite human to begin with. 3 stories, 3 different forests, 3 experiences that defy explanation. But they all share something profound and deeply unsettling. They happen to ordinary people doing ordinary things. People who went camping expecting nothing more than a peaceful escape from daily life. People who found something else instead. Something that challenged their understanding of reality. Something they still can't fully explain. What strikes me most about these stories is how they stayed with the people who experienced them. Years later, decades later in some cases, these moments remain vivid. The warm teacup, the footsteps circling the tent, the woman with black eyes. These aren't distant memories that have faded with time. They're fresh wounds that never quite healed, questions that never found answers. And maybe that's what makes them so terrifying. Not monsters or obvious threats, but the subtle wrongness of things. The realization that you weren't as alone as you thought. The knowledge that something was watching you, close enough to touch, while you slept or walked or existed in what you believed was safety. I need you to do something for me before you go. Hit that like button if these stories affected you. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another true horror experience. And most importantly, drop a comment sharing your own story. Have you ever experienced something while camping that you couldn't explain? Something that still bothers you years later? Share it below, because I read every comment, and you never know who else might have experienced something similar. Here's what I want you to remember. These stories are real. I didn't make them up to entertain you. Real people lived through these experiences and were changed by them. They walked into forests expecting peace, and came out questioning the nature of reality itself. So the next time you're planning a camping trip, maybe to that remote location you've been researching, maybe to that state park that promises absolute solitude, I want you to think about these stories. Think about the cup of tea that appeared from nowhere. Think about the voices whispering in the darkness. Think about the woman whose eyes went black as she walked toward someone frozen with fear. And then decide if solitude is really what you want. Because sometimes being alone in nature means being alone with things that were never natural to begin with. Things that understand the darkness better than we ever will. Things that leave traces just significant enough to let us know they were there, watching, waiting, existing just beyond our comprehension. Sleep well tonight. And if you do go camping, maybe bring more than just a flashlight. Bring friends. Bring courage. And bring the knowledge that some mysteries don't have answers. Some places hold secrets we're not meant to understand. And some experiences change us forever. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, not all shadows are empty. Not all silence is peaceful, and not all solitude is truly solitary. The wilderness is waiting. The question is, are you ready for what waits back?